Welcome to the Crimson Dossier. Every case has a file. Not every file has answers. Let's begin. Part 1. He's part of a volunteer patrol. Hundreds of ordinary citizens recruited to help find a monster. He doesn't know it yet, but he's walking alongside that monster right now. The man next to him smiles politely. He's helpful. He asks good questions about the investigation. He knows exactly which areas the police suspect most. His name is Andrei Chikatilo. And by the time this patrol ends, he already knows where his next victim will be. Between 1982 and 1990, a serial killer operated across the Soviet Union, one of the largest countries on Earth, slipping through the cracks of one of the most controlled societies in history. He killed at least 43 people, children, teenagers, women. He killed across multiple cities, multiple regions. He killed while working a day job, while raising a family, while helping police search for himself. He was caught not because investigators outsmarted him, but almost by accident. Today we're opening the file on Andrei Chikatilo, the man Soviet newspapers called the Rostov Ripper, the man who called himself a mistake of nature. Andrei Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in Soviet Ukraine, and the world he arrived into was a brutal one. By the time he was 6, the German army had occupied his village. He would later claim that as a child he was forced to lie motionless beneath the bodies of executed children through an entire night, pretending to be dead to avoid being shot himself. Whether that specific memory is accurate, we can't verify. What we know for certain is that his early years were defined by violence, fear, and survival. Then there was the story his parents told him, repeatedly, it seems, that his older brother had been kidnapped and eaten by neighbors during the famine years. True or not, that story lodged itself in the mind of a young boy who was already struggling. Chikatilo suffered from bedwetting well into his adolescence. His mother beat him for it. He was socially isolated at school, awkward, mocked, unable to connect with other children. He grew into a young man who desperately wanted to be seen as respectable, as educated, as normal. And on paper, he almost pulled it off. He earned a degree in philology from Rostov State University. He got married. He had 2 children, a daughter, Lyudmila, and a son, Yuri. He became a school teacher, but behind that ordinary life, something was very wrong. Almost immediately after starting work at a boarding school, complaints began. Girls reported that he came into their dormitories at night, that he grabbed them, that he touched them in ways no teacher should. The final incident happened on a school trip to a river, when Chikatilo swam up to a young female student and groped her under the pretense of saving her from drowning. He was fired. He found another teaching position. He was fired from that one too. Same reasons. His wife refused to believe the accusations. His son defended him, but his daughter Lyudmila had seen enough. She moved out the moment she could. Years later, when Lyudmila brought her own young son to visit his grandparents, she woke in the night to find her father in the child's room. She left and never came back. And she was right to go. By 1978, Chikatilo had moved his family to the city of Shakhty in the Rostov region. And that year, a 9-year-old girl named Lena Zakotnova was found near a riverbank, raped and strangled. Chikatilo came up briefly as a suspect. Then investigators shifted focus to a previously convicted neighbor who was arrested, found guilty, and executed. Years later, after Chikatilo was already behind bars for dozens of other murders, he would confess to killing Lena Zakotnova. Then he retracted the confession. The truth of who killed her was never definitively established, but the man executed for her murder was officially declared innocent. An innocent man was shot for a crime Chikatilo almost certainly committed. The Soviet justice system had moved on. Chikatilo had time to kill again. The confirmed killing spree began in 1982. In a single year, Chikatilo murdered 7 children and teenagers, ranging in age from 9 to 18. The number grew steadily from there. His method of finding victims was disarmingly simple. He would approach children alone, at bus stations, train platforms, near schools, and offer them something. A treat, a trip somewhere interesting, a shortcut through the forest. He came across as a harmless, slightly awkward older man. Educated, polite, safe. One boy was led away from a grocery store with his mother's permission. Chikatilo had asked the child to help him carry some bottles. The mother agreed. Her son was never seen alive again. The victims were predominantly children, easier to lure, harder to fight back. But Chikatilo also killed women he encountered alone, including sex workers who had reason to trust a paying customer. The murders were extraordinarily violent. Most victims were found with dozens of stab wounds, organs removed, eyes gouged out. In at least one case, Chikatilo bit off and consumed part of a victim's body. His motive was sexual, but he suffered from impotence and could only achieve satisfaction through the act of killing itself. The violence was the act, in his psychology. This would later become central to understanding him, and central to catching him. For years, Rostov investigators were essentially blind. They had no reliable description, no DNA match, no consistent witness. Bodies kept appearing in forest clearings across a growing number of Soviet regions, which itself was part of the problem. The Soviet system was not designed for inter-regional serial killer investigations. Each jurisdiction worked largely in isolation. Then a psychiatrist entered the picture. Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky was one of the Soviet Union's first criminal profilers, a field that barely existed in the USSR at the time. When investigators finally brought him in, Bukhanovsky did something that sounds obvious now but was genuinely radical then. He concluded that the killer was not a marginal figure, not a drifter or a known criminal, but a completely ordinary man. Probably married, probably employed, probably raising children of his own. He also determined that the killer likely traveled for work, because the bodies were spread across too many cities for someone without a legitimate reason to move around. That profile fit Chikatilo exactly. He worked in supply logistics. He traveled constantly. He had an official reason to be in every city where a body was found. A major operation called Forest Belt, Lesopolosa, was launched in early 1986. It cost nearly 10 million Soviet rubles, hundreds of officers, military helicopters, roadblocks. It caught thousands of ordinary criminals. It did not catch Chikatilo. In fact, in 1986, Chikatilo joined the civilian volunteer patrol that was part of a search effort. He walked the same forest paths as the investigators. He asked questions. He built rapport with police officers who had no idea who he was. He was hunting himself. In the autumn of 1984, Chikatilo made a mistake. He was leaving a forested area near the body of a recently killed woman when he walked directly into a police patrol. He was detained and brought in for questioning. Officers searched his bag. They found a knife, rope, and a tube of petroleum jelly. Chikatilo calmly explained each item. The rope was for bundling packages at work. The knife was to cut the rope. The jelly was for dry skin. It was thin, but then came the blood test. Soviet investigators had biological evidence from the crime scenes, evidence pointing to a specific blood type. Chikatilo's blood test came back as a different type. He was released. This mismatch was later described as the Chikatilo phenomenon, the idea that some individuals can have different blood typing in different biological samples. The investigative committee would eventually reject this explanation entirely. The more likely answer: a lab technician made an error. A clerical mistake set a serial killer free. Chikatilo, rattled by how close he'd come, then did something strange and calculated. He deliberately stole equipment from his workplace. He was expelled from the Communist Party and sentenced to corrective labor. He served 3 months before being released for good behavior. His logic: hide in the prison system long enough for police attention to drift elsewhere. By late 1990, the investigation had quietly intensified again. Plainclothes officers were stationed at train and bus platforms across the Rostov region, exactly the kind of transit hubs where Chikatilo found his victims. His last confirmed victim was a 22-year-old woman. After killing her in a forested area near a railway platform, Chikatilo emerged from the trees and was stopped by a patrolling officer. The officer had no specific grounds to detain him. He simply noted down Chikatilo's name and let him go. A week later, a couple out picking mushrooms found the body. The officer remembered the strange man at the tree line. He reported the encounter. Chikatilo was brought in for the last time. At first he said nothing. Investigators had circumstantial evidence but no confession. Then Dr. Bukhanovsky, the same psychiatrist who had built the original profile, sat down with Chikatilo for an extended interview. Not an interrogation, a conversation. Bukhanovsky let Chikatilo talk about his childhood, his sense of inadequacy, his anger, his shame. He treated him, if not with sympathy, then at least with the seriousness of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. And Chikatilo talked. He confessed. He walked investigators through 43 confirmed murders. He claimed responsibility for 55 total. At his trial, Chikatilo arrived in a metal cage, a precaution after threats from victims' families. He shouted. He rambled. He exposed himself. His attorneys argued schizophrenia. The court found him sane. On the last day of proceedings, Chikatilo spoke about himself in the third person, as though already narrating his own ending. Wherever I worked, wherever I went, dead bodies were left behind. That's how it went. Every year, I am some kind of mistake of nature, some kind of filth. I became a wild beast in this society. Quote, he was sentenced to death on 52 counts of murder. On February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day, Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head. The Chikatilo case broke open something the Soviet state had spent decades insisting didn't exist. The idea that ordinary-looking men, living ordinary lives, could be capable of extraordinary evil. He wasn't a monster who looked like a monster. He was a schoolteacher, a coworker, a volunteer. That's the part that lingers. If you want to go deeper, the failed forensic evidence, the executed innocent man, the psychology behind Bukhanovsky's interrogation. Let me know in the comments. There's more in this file. I'm the Crimson Dossier. New cases every day. The file stays open.